I'm Henry Baskin, your host for this edition of Due Process. We're going to be talking about bankruptcy law next, right here.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
What do you get if you equip the standard Lexus ES more like some others in its class? Perhaps it's more a question of what you don't get. The Lexus ES Standard is nothing short of extraordinary.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.
We thought today we'd talk about bankruptcy law here on Due Process because it's an area of law that seems to be growing larger and larger every day. With the economy going south, the bankruptcy laws and the bankruptcy filings have gone up. It's been a problem for people to understand exactly what they're facing. Should they go into bankruptcy? Can they keep their houses? Can they keep their cars? Can they keep their children? Can they keep their husbands, wives, dogs, you name it? We're going to find out today. We've invited two special guests. We have Charles, we'll call him Chuck Bullock from Stevenson and Bullock, who practices in the area, and Mark H. Shapiro from Steinberg, Shapiro and Clark, who also is a practitioner in the area. A little later, we'll be joined by a financial and educational consultant to help us through this maze and see if we can help you. But I want to thank you for coming to Due Process and spending some time with us and helping us understand the bankruptcy law.
Thank you, Henry.
It's just like, I know there's been a change over the last several years, if that's correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Pretty much in October of 2005, the law changed when Congress tried to make it more difficult for people to file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and just discharge their debts, and to push more of them into a Chapter 13 where they had to pay something back toward their obligations.
Okay, and I assume, Chuck, that was more of a political decision than anything else, where the credit card companies and people like that were railing against these Chapter 7 filings and wiping out debt.
That's correct. There was a lot of money spent, frankly, on both sides. At the end of the day, I think the creditors won that fight.
Right, it seems that way. So it made it harder for someone to go, let's just use the word bankrupt. We're not going to talk about reorganizations. We're not going to talk about corporate bankruptcies. But you sort of wonder, you know, if people like General Motors and Chrysler can go into bankruptcy, and the government will loan millions and millions and billions of dollars to save the industry, tell me about the person that lives down the street from me or down the street from you. Here they're faced with the fact that they can't pay their bills. The credit card interest is almost 20%. And they come to you and say, what can we do?
Yeah, it's outrageous, and I think the first thing that you have to look at is the context or the construct of people who are filing bankruptcy these days. It's not your typical debtors who you saw 20 years ago, people who had just gotten into some credit card problems. It's now people who really do live down the street from you, who the value of their homes has dropped so substantially that now the property is worth much less than what they owe on it, and they're faced with a decision of continuing to make payments on a property that is never going to have any equity, or filing bankruptcy and walking away. But it's doctors, it's lawyers, it's real estate developers, people that we never expected to see.
Chuck, how long have you been in this business?
About 15 years, and it's not the guy you don't know anymore. It's the person next door, your family member. And one of the major concerns I think practitioners like Mark and I have is, are we able to get that person from the point that they walk into our office to a better place after the bankruptcy case is concluded?
Well, when they walk into your respective offices, they say, I'm here to file bankruptcy. They must be, because you're a bankruptcy lawyer, you're a bankruptcy lawyer.
Yeah, that's not always the case. Sometimes they're coming in because they just don't know what the right answer is. And sometimes it's not to file bankruptcy, but more frequently than not these days, it is to use some sort of Title 11 process, some bankruptcy process, to try and get them some relief from their obligations.
Well, how successful, because I know the bankruptcy rate is going up. I mean, I understand people every day who say, well, we file bankruptcy. Now, in the days prior to the new law, when someone filed bankruptcy, they became a good credit risk because they couldn't file for another 7 years. Is that true?
Isn't that the case? It used to be that way.
Ah.
With the credit markets tightening up, though, the old way of you file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you obtain a discharge, and that next day there's a credit card application sitting in your mailbox.
Right. Well,
not anymore.
Tell me about your typical case, both of you. I mean, you may have atypical cases, but tell me about your typical case of someone that comes in. What are their assets, what are their debts, and what do you ultimately do with them?
I'd like to jump right in with sort of the neighbor scenario. It's the person that they have some form of employment. They may have been laid off for a little while, but there's income coming in. Unfortunately, they've either overextended themselves on home mortgages or their rent or their car payment, or because of the loss of income temporarily, they've fallen behind. Generally, we'll see some credit card debt, some medical bills. Student loans are becoming the norm. I think Mark would agree with me. And very few assets, though. We used to see 401ks and IRAs and KEO plans with big balances. I just don't see those anymore.
Well, they've borrowed against them, or they've dissipated those trying to stay afloat, and it really makes for a difficult situation.
So they walk into your office, and can you give them hope of a better tomorrow? I mean, what can you do for these people?
I would say in the vast majority of cases you can. You know, one of the reasons that I got into this business, and I'm sure Chuck feels the same way, is that there's a lot of gratification from somebody coming in and being in probably the worst situation of their life. A lot of times there are marital problems that arise out of the debts, and being able to clean up a lot of that and get them on their way is really a gratification. There's a real gratification to that process.
Aside from bankruptcy, what methods can you use to get them out of this hole that they're in?
One of the things that we often try to do, and I think most good practitioners try to do, is figure out if there's a way to avoid the bankruptcy case. Now, if it's just a credit card issue, often we'll get all the bills together and try to figure out, is there a way to do some form of a plan outside of bankruptcy where these creditors are going to get maybe even a little bit more than they would inside of a bankruptcy case?
Will they work with you?
It's hard. I think the hardest thing to do is to get the right person on the telephone.
It's very hit and miss.
Are there certain companies, well, let's stick to credit cards. Are there certain companies that will talk to you as opposed to others that will Diners Club or Amex or whatever talk to you, and some won't talk to you?
I don't know that it's a particular company. I don't think I can make any distinction in that regard, but one of the things that I've found is that they won't negotiate or deal with our clients directly. It really requires the clients to stop making the payments if they haven't already, and then to notify them the next time that they call that they've retained bankruptcy counsel, at which point we start to get some phone calls from people higher up in the organization who are willing to talk about some sort of negotiated resolution.
Well, on a later show we're going to talk about foreclosures, but the payment on a mortgage, these people came to the bank and said, we're going to buy a house. Here's your mortgage. This was years ago. And by the way, here's a second mortgage. You can borrow on, as they call it, a home equity loan. You can borrow on that. So now they walk into your office, they've got a mortgage and they got a home equity loan, and they can't make the payments. What can you do if you go into bankruptcy?
It depends on what type of bankruptcy you go into. Just backing up slightly, we see two types, either a Chapter 7, which is the traditional liquidating bankruptcy case, or the Chapter 13 case, where we put together a plan in good faith. We deal with things like feasibility, and we're able to cure arrearages over time. So if you have that guy with a $5,000 or $10,000 arrearage on their house, they're behind, you can have some time to get that caught up.
Well, but they don't say they don't have a job, or they're now working at Walmart's as a greeter as opposed to working for the engineering company that was paying them $1,000 a week.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation.
Oh, yes.
There's I remember 10 years ago that one of the primary focus of clients who came in to see me was to hang on to their house. Even if from all practical appearances they weren't able to do that because their income had been reduced or had been eliminated, that's not so much the sense anymore of people. People are much more pragmatic about it when they come to see us, at least from my perspective. They're much more willing to walk away from the house because it makes financial sense to do that.
There isn't a person I know, with some exception, that doesn't have overwhelming medical bills. And you mentioned one that's really close to my heart, loans that were taken to get through college, to earn degrees, to get better jobs, which they're not getting. Enormous loans, owed to the government, owed to the state, owed to whomever. They walk into your office with a bag full of bills and say, this is what's going on in my life every single day. They can't live under that pressure. And if you're not working, you have to take them into bankruptcy, don't you?
Henry, it is very difficult, although it's part of the job, to tell someone that they can't afford their house, that they need to take their kids and move to a different neighborhood, or they need to move into temporary housing, apartments and things like that. But we have to do it at times.
So you, in effect, become financial counselors for that period of time.
It's not only, I mean, it's even more than a counseling, it's a strategy and a timing. I mean, there are so many issues that come into play. I mean, one of the things that frequently, after you get past that first step of explaining to the client that, you know, they probably need to walk away from that house, then you start to think about the timing of the bankruptcy and how long they can live in that house through the whole foreclosure process. And all of those things come into play in terms of staging a bankruptcy filing.
I'll give you a scenario. Bought some furniture, can't make the payments. Bought a boat, can't make the payments. Bought a house, can't make the payments. Medical bills overwhelming. Can't pay the doctors, not covered by my Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance, whoever, whatever. Tell me the process then of these people who don't have income or very little income with these enormous bills that you can't resolve on the telephone.
I think it starts with the budget.
Okay.
We have to determine whether or not there's anything coming in, and we take everything into consideration. If there's alimony, if there's maintenance, child support, support from the government, family members, to set up the preliminary budget to determine what does it cost to keep you in some form of housing with utilities on and eating food. I've never seen a boat or a snowmobile that I haven't told my client in a Chapter 7, you need to get rid of that.
Okay, but take me through the Chapter 7 process, which would be for the normal person that, you know, lives a couple blocks away.
Well, if the income is limited, they probably aren't going to have a problem with qualifying for a Chapter 7. And again, a Chapter 7 is a straight liquidation proceeding. So the general premise of a Chapter 7 is that the debtors make a full disclosure of everything that they own and everybody that they owe money to, and in exchange for that full disclosure, they get a discharge of their debts.
Okay, but is there anything that you can save out of this mess that comes in? Is there anything that you can't discharge, or you, well, you say you discharge a debt in bankruptcy, but can you keep certain things? Can you
Sure. There's actually a fair amount of property that you can keep. In Michigan, we have the benefit of being entitled, a debtor has the ability to make a decision of whether they take the state exemptions or the federal exemptions. Exemptions are essentially Congress's decision of what property someone's allowed to keep, notwithstanding the fact that they're filing bankruptcy.
Okay.
So when they created the bankruptcy code, Congress created also a list of different types of property up to certain dollar limits that people are allowed to protect at the time that they file a bankruptcy. And for most people, it covers a substantial portion of the property that they have, if not everything that they have.
Let me give you an example, Henry. Something like household goods and furnishings.
Right.
You're going to see, under the federal statute, an ability for a debtor to keep north of $10,000 of aggregate value of their household goods and furnishings.
Okay. Even though they're going through bankruptcy.
Even though they're
so
going
you have
through.
to balance that. We're going to go to a break, but I just, you know, so people can keep their mother's silverware and things such as that in some occasions.
Depending on the value of that silverware, sure.
So there's a dollar limit to it. When we come back, we're going to take a break here, be coming back and talking to someone from the Lighthouse Community Development Company who assists people in solving some of these problems. We'll be right back.
Legal referrals and more information on this and other related topics are available on our website at www.dueprocess.tv. There you'll find information on today's program, helpful hints to legal issues, support materials, and lawyer referrals. You can also stream previous episodes of Due Process.
We're back talking about bankruptcy with our bankruptcy specialist, and we're going to be joined by Greg Stearns in a moment. But so there is some light at the end of this tunnel that people are looking at.
I absolutely. Although I've had a couple of the cases, they're a relative rarity where someone even as a result of the bankruptcy, they've lost their business, they've lost their job, and it's still a very, very difficult situation for them even after the bankruptcy. But for most people, if they're earning some level of income and they've gotten away from the burden of those debts, they're really able to turn their lives around.
Okay, can they keep their cars?
As a general rule, if you look at how we're driving or acquiring vehicles now, these leases,
Right.
And the leases are almost never a problem because there's no equity in the lease.
Right.
And as long as the payment's made, you're going to keep the car, if you can afford to keep the car.
Okay.
Generally, you're also not seeing a lot of equity in the cars that we're buying.
Right,
So there's
right.
$3,000+ you're often
especially if
there.
it's a lease car, there's no equity. You know, there are programs in place, and we've had other programs we talked about in the past, but this is Greg Stearns from the manager of the Financial Education and Counseling Lighthouse Community Development. Greg, thanks for joining us here. If I can get you in here. Thank you. How you doing?
Doing good, Henry. Thank you for having me.
Good. Tell me about the Lighthouse. Is this located in Pontiac, Michigan?
Yes, our main office is in Pontiac on the south side of the city.
Okay. And what is it that you do with these people that we've been talking about here who come to you and they say, listen, I've owned a house for years, I've had a job, I've lost my job, and I have enormous debt. What do you do with these people?
Well, I think the first thing we try to do is establish some hope. Because when we talk about bankruptcy, it's an extremely difficult situation. There's a stigma attached to it over the years. A lot of folks want to avoid it as much as they possibly can. So we've instructed our counselors that when you're meeting with a client and they're dealing with a financial issue like this that might lead to bankruptcy, is let's talk about the hope. Let's talk about what they are able to do in the future to reestablish their financial situation. I'd like to share just I think a real great account of a client that we worked with a number of years ago. And when she came to us, she was going through some very difficult times. We talked to her about trying to readjust the budget. That was not going to work for a variety of reasons. Make a long story short, she ended up filing a Chapter 7. But after she did that, we immediately began to work with her in developing ways of being able to reestablish the credit. We started that right at the beginning, and we work with a lot of financial institutions that have established what we call second chance programs. As long as they're clients of ours, they're going through our one-on-one counseling, they're going through our classes. Financial institutions that have these second chance programs are willing to work with us to help reestablish credit through the secured credit cards. We've had some savings accounts that become a credit-oriented savings account. We work with them to help them to understand what they really need to let go of in their budget, what's really a need, what really is a want, and how to readjust.
Okay. When there's no money coming in the front door, it's awfully difficult for you to work. I mean, there has to be some income in order to work this out.
That's correct.
Okay, it may be modified from what they were earning previously, but you set up a budget. You've heard Mark and Chuck talk about the process and what they do. What they do seems to be similar to what you do in trying to adjust them lives and say, look, maybe bankruptcy is not the answer. Maybe you can do this, this, or that. Or maybe they can. Do you do the same thing they try to do and talk to credit card companies and ameliorate the debt?
Well, we don't specifically talk to the credit card companies ourselves, but we do have a process that we help our clients to be able to work with the credit card companies if they're willing to negotiate. Before we do that, we're going to look at their budget. We're going to look and see, are the resources there? What really is the option? And it used to be that we tried everything possible to avoid discussing a bankruptcy. That wasn't the way we wanted them to go. But we found ourselves in the last several years, because of the economic situation, that we tend to discuss that more frequently, both in our classes and one-on-one, because in many instances that really is the only option that our clients have.
Well, Greg, you talk about classes, and you've heard Mark and you've heard Chuck talk about what they try to do. Do you have any disagreements with what they're saying?
No, I think the direction they're going is, particularly in today's economy, it truly is an option, and the impression I'm getting in listening to both of them is that they're looking out for the best interests of the debtor to do what they possibly can to to help them to move on to the next steps.
So what you do is open and free to the public, correct?
Yes, we are.
And it's more about learning how to manage what they have as opposed to the previous free spending days they had.
Absolutely. We do a lot of hand-holding, and we'll work with a person as long as they're willing to work with us and take the steps that they need to.
We'll supply the information to our audience, but I want to thank you for being here and being available to these people, and your doors are open to everyone, correct?
Yes, it is. There's no income limitations.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you've heard a accredited advisor, a financial advisor, which might help the future problems of people misspending or going overboard in what they do. But I'm trying to understand, we're still stuck with that dilemma. If there's no money, how do we do this? I mean, you ask people to borrow money from their relatives to see if they could help, or is that an option?
You know, one of the things that I often take away from talks like this is it all comes down to the budget. Everything comes down to the budget. And if we have to tell the client to go talk to a family member or a friend to borrow money on a short term, never money that they're not intending on repaying, but just to have the basic necessities taken care of, I find myself doing that often. I don't know about Mark.
I think that's fantastic if the client has that opportunity. Unfortunately, a lot of people have already tapped all of the resources that they have by the time they come to us. You know, and frequently it's unfortunate because by the time that people have come to us, they've exhausted all of their resources, including their retirement benefits, which they've drawn on, or family members. And hopefully we get to them and we have a chance to try and do some planning before they get to that point.
Well, you talk about retirement benefits. When you take money out of your retirement, you have to pay tax on that. You have to pay a penalty on that.
And that tax typically isn't dischargeable in bankruptcy either, which compounds the problem.
Right. Can you discharge federal tax or state tax in bankruptcy?
Income taxes under certain circumstances you can.
They're extreme circumstances. I mean,
it depends on the age of the taxes.
And the government keeps rolling along with interest charges.
And liens.
And liens.
And liens.
Yeah, and that's frequently more the issue. A lot of times the cases that I think both of us deal with, we can discharge the taxes in bankruptcy, but the government has liens on other property, including the retirement investments.
Let me understand this. The government said to the credit card companies, you can charge 20% interest on unpaid bills. The government said, you can buy that house. The government said you can give a second mortgage. The government said you can buy this car on a lease. The government said you can do these things. And now the government is saying, you owe us money, we want it. I mean, there was no policy against people shooting themselves in the foot financially. The government wasn't there to help. Nobody was there to help except people such as the Lighthouse, people such as yourselves, and the government allowed this to go on.
And then add to that the government made it harder for people to file bankruptcy.
Well, I don't want to get into a political discussion and go into who was president at the time and what Congress was in power. The point is, why would you make it harder for these poor people to go through what there's something called the means test or something? I don't even know what that is. Is that like, do you have the means to pay? Is that what it is?
Well, that's part of the changes to the bankruptcy code back in October of 2005, and it was part of the intent to try and make it more difficult for people to file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So it's actually a series of tests that debtors have to go through in order to determine whether they qualify for Chapter 7.
Do they go to classes? Do they go to school?
There is debtor education. There's credit counseling, which is open to debate whether or not that's been beneficial prior to bankruptcy.
I don't want to debate it. I just want to make a statement because we only have a minute or two to go. Those people are subject to scams. I see this on television. They buy their commercials and say, we can help you with your debt to the government. We can help you with all your debts. Come and see us. Give us $5,000. We'll take care of all your problems. It's a scam. I know it's a scam. It has to be a scam. Maybe you can't say it. I can say it because I don't practice in that field. But isn't it true that there's no magic potion out there?
No, there's no magic. It's whatever's prescribed in the bankruptcy code, and that's essentially all the relief that you can get.
And if it sounds like it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true. No one has a magic wand that can wave over a creditor outside of bankruptcy to get them to do what that person wants them to do.
So you have to advise people not to be taken in by that and go seek competent advice from competent lawyers or people such as the Lighthouse and get some good sound advice where they have no interest but your interest in the situation.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Well, I have to thank you, Mark. Thanks for coming down. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Chuck, I appreciate your coming down here and your commitment to this area. I mean, yeah, I know you're not going to save the world, but you know you're going to do your best to save some of these people from extinction. I mean, I don't know where they go after that. They file bankruptcy, and they get a credit card in the mail, as you say. I think one of the best things that we can tell people is that I would tell people that the best investment you can make today is to pay your credit card and get rid of the 20% interest. But I mean, where could you make 20% on your money? I mean, I think that'd be a good thing. But people are inundated by debts that you've never seen before. The school debt, the borrowing money to get an education, and you probably never saw it before. So once again, I want to thank you for being here. And if you have any last comments, you can just.
I think that the most important thing that people can do is make sure that they find a good attorney if they are going to go through this process. Somebody who's knowledgeable and does it on a regular basis.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
What do you get if you equip the standard Lexus ES more like some others in its class? Perhaps it's more a question of what you don't get. The Lexus ES Standard is nothing short of extraordinary.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.